That surprise, of course, will come at the end with almost everyone. They'll be on by then, hopefully. And if they don't log on, then they don't get the surprise. Hey, Brock.
Hello. Sorry.
No, you're
The
fine.
delay.
Technology has not been my friends today. I was this morning.
So could you remind me which chapters do we review for the exam?
For the final exam, it is going to be chapters 21 through 25.
Okay, all right.
Which is a good question that everyone probably needs to know the answer to. I am actually going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, your big surprise will come at the very end, so hang on after the lecture today and stick around for that. I'm also going to be going over a couple things with you guys at the end when hopefully more people are on. But I don't want to hold you guys up that did come on time because I'm sure everyone has other things that they got to get done tonight. I know I have to pack tonight. So I too do not want to be here forever. Okay.
Where are you going?
I'm just going to go visit my parents in Monahans for a few days, so not too far, but
Sounds great.
yeah, that's the other thing that I have to tell you guys about. For some reason, this is not sharing tonight. There is not really internet in Monahans. There is, but it's extraordinarily slow and it doesn't really work well. So if you guys, for whatever reason, have issues with stuff from Wednesday until Saturday, I will be trying to check emails, but I don't know how much help I'm going to be able to be. So if you have questions about how to do stuff, tonight would be the night to ask. And like I said, we're going to have time to do that at the end. But thanks, Brock, for reminding me of that. And Alba also reminding me as well. But for today's lesson, big, important thing. So you guys do have a long essay question on your final exam, and that long essay question has to do about what happens to art between World War I and World War II, and what happens right after World War II. So we talked about what happens between World War I and World War II last week with last week's chapter. And this week we are going to be going over what happens to the art world in post-war times. So during World War II, Europe was a mess. A lot of people were fleeing Europe, particularly Jewish people, but also artists who were living in places like Germany that were worried for their lives and their livelihood. They fled to places, well, mostly the United States was where almost all of them ended up. So in the United States, during World War II and right after World War II, there was a large influx of contemporary artists from Europe. We already mentioned last week that art in Europe differed drastically in comparison to art from the United States. So if you remember art in Europe, there were the Fauves, the De Brooks, all of those guys, the Cubists, people like Cézanne and Picasso were working over there. So a lot of really interesting and contemporary art movements were happening. But in the United States, we were seeing landscape photography and American regionalism, which is quite a bit different. Post World War II, a lot of those artists sought jobs in art schools as teachers, and they also started up their own galleries in the major cities. And United States artists were learning from those European immigrants. This ended up affecting United States art. It's at this point that we really see art being produced that had absolutely no rules whatsoever and was extremely creative in the United States. In fact, pre-World War II, the art capital of the world was Paris, France. However, during World War II, that art capital, because all the artists fled, ended up becoming New York City. So New York City is a major hub of these contemporary artists that are creating new movements and educating our next generation of artists. Some of those people that were part of that new generation were abstract expressionists. Abstract Expressionism was a very popular movement post-World War II. It originated from New York. It was once again those European artists that were teaching these younger artists, these United States artists, their new creative ways of thinking, and the US artists were latching onto that and creating new movements like Abstract Expressionism. Abstract Expressionism is a culmination of all of the previously discussed movements from last week's class, all combined into one. It also uses a lot of color theory, which we're going to talk about in a second when we get to those abstract expressionists that specialized in color theory movements. But once again, abstract expressionism, very freeing and very creative. There are no rules whatsoever. And this is the particular movement that a lot of people really hate. But if you keep in mind that it really expresses the freedom that these United States artists were experiencing, the freedom from American regionalism and landscape into newness, it kind of makes sense for them to be producing works like that. And of course, one of the most well-known abstract expressionists is Jackson Pollock. This is Jackson Pollock's Autumn Rhythm, number 30. Jackson Pollock did something called action painting or drip painting, in which he would lay out large pieces of canvas fabric on the floor and then fling paint around and drip paint onto it in different patterns and styles. It was almost like he was dancing around the canvas. And that was how he chose to express his feelings and emotions. Of course, once again, we, like I mentioned, are talking a little bit when we get to abstract expressionism with color theory. So with colors come the expression of certain emotions and feelings. I'm sure if you remember back to when we were originally talking about colors at the beginning of the semester, which was a long time ago, we talked about how colors like red can mean anger or passion. Yellow can mean happiness, blue, sadness. Different colors mean different things. So these artists were using the power of colors to express themselves. And Jackson Pollock was also using the power of his movements and the freedom of his movements to express himself. And we are going to briefly watch a very, very short video of Pollock performing his action paintings. Man, it does not want to share today. Let me try this again, guys. Sorry. I think the problem is it just doesn't want me to go to full screen. Not today. That was Jackson Pollock's studio. We're going to fast forward a little bit because I don't think you really need to see his studio. He would wear special paint covered shoes when he was working. because, yeah, paint dripping, messy. And he was a heavy smoker. Not that you really need to know that. See if we're ever going to get to that. Okay, here we go. So he has mixed the paint with some turpentine to thin it out into a liquidy form instead of a thick paste. And that's what he's doing now, is mixing that. And now you can see he's literally just ladling it on to the canvas. And he'll keep going around and doing that and adding different colors until he gets the look that he's going for. Don't you wish you'd thought of that? You could have been a millionaire. Another abstract expressionist who's working with some actual subject matter is Willem de Kooning. Willem de Kooning is a bit of a contested artist. Most feminist artists are not a fan of de Kooning because of the way he chose to portray women. But this is de Kooning's Woman and Bicycle. So here you see a woman with multiple mouths when in actuality, just echoed with her necklace. It's the same format. Large almond-shaped eyes, pointy breasts, and arms as well as legs down at the bottom. And here you can see the bicycle wheels coming through. So, like I said, most women were very offended by his choice and portrayal of females. A lot of women feel like he portrayed them as monstrous, but that was just how de Kooning felt like portraying women. Of course, this is a very abstract interpretation of a female on a bicycle, which is why it falls under the key of abstract expressionism, and this was how he chose to express his viewpoint of women. And de Kooning was a married man. He was actually married to a female artist. So was Pollock. Pollock was also married to a female artist. In fact, Willem de Kooning and Pollock were in the same friends circle. So they did know each other. And that takes us to the color field painters. Color field painting is another form of abstract expressionism. The color field painting came out of a school, an art school that was taking place in New York City. They were being taught by an artist that immigrated from Germany and was teaching the idea of color field theory at this particular New York school. And some of the students that he taught were people like Mark Rothko. So the man's name, I need to capitalize that, was Hans Hofmann. He was the originator of this idea of color field painting. And color field painting is the idea that certain colors have certain moods, but certain colors also have a push or a pull. For example, your cooler colors recede into space, whereas your warmer colors push forward. This helps add to focal points and movement and balance within your paintings, making them a little bit more interesting to look at. And like I said, one of Hans Hofmann's students was Mark Rothko. Mark Rothko works in the theory of color field painting. So the idea that colors have meanings and certain colors have a push and a pull. So your red here has a strong pull, meaning it pulls forward, whereas your blues recede into space. So if you stared at this long enough, it should look like things are shifting in and out of the picture frame. Of course, there is your orange stripe down at the bottom. Mark Rothko liked to show his moods and his mood changes in his paintings. Actually, I might Google it because we have a little bit of time today. So one of the ways, I'll pull this up when I get the images there. I'm still Googling them. Okay. This is just, my Teams is going to be so mad at me because I just keep going back and forth with the sharing. So here's Rothko Chapel. It's located in Houston, Texas. So if you want to go, you can. But these were done at the very end of Rothko's career. It's literally a room that's filled with the last of Rothko's paintings that he ever did. Quite a bit different from the orange one that we just saw, the orange and red and blue one. But it did illustrate his mood at the time. Any guesses as to how he was feeling mentally when he was painting these?
Probably lonely.
Possibly lonely. Someone else said something and I didn't catch it.
That was the same thing.
Why do you guys think he might have been lonely?
Because of the dark colors?
Yeah, so what else can dark colors reference? Besides loneliness.
It can reference like emotion, like a bad emotion.
A very dark and bad emotion, yes. So these canvases are solid gray and black, telling you that his mental state at that time was much darker than just basic loneliness. Loneliness can be portrayed with just a simple blue or a gray. These are black. So it goes way deeper than that, than just basic being sad or lonely. He is in a very dark, desperate place mentally when he's painting these. In fact, shortly after he paints these, he ends up committing suicide. So really, throughout Rothko's career, you can see his mental state change to when he gets to this point. Unfortunately, you'd think people would have been smart enough to catch on to this and maybe get him some help, but they did not, which is sad for us. I personally enjoy Rothko's paintings. I am very interested in symmetry, and portrayals of symmetry, and I find his paintings very aesthetically pleasing to look at just because they are so symmetrical, and I love large swatches of color as well. Some people don't like Rothko because they think it's too simple, but I am a fan. I noticed that today also when I was talking about something else in the morning. I'm like, oh, I really like symmetrical things. It's just so nice to look at. So here is another color field painting student. This is Helen Frankenthaler in her Mountain and Sea. For this painting, she did not prime her canvas. Normally, all artists would want to prime their canvas. Why? Your paint will seep through it, but she chose not to prime her canvas, allowing the paint to seep through and spread throughout, which is how she got this watercolor effect going on here, even though she's using oil and charcoal. This is actually a landscape painting that she did on a trip. So she was outside and she saw a mountain with a seascape around it, and she decided to quickly and very abstractly paint that, which is another reason why she didn't prime her canvas, because she just didn't have a primed canvas on her at that moment. But it ended up turning into her life masterpiece. Unfortunately, she did this when she was 20, and it became the only thing that she was really famous for. It was the first thing she ever did, which is kind of unfortunate. Don't you just hate that? I hate that for people sometimes. I see it in music all the time. People make one thing, and then that's the only thing, those one-hit wonders. And here is our last example of color field painting. This is Robert Motherwell's LG to the Spanish Republic. The Dallas Museum of Art and the Fort Worth Modern Museum both have sections of this series. So there are many, many members of this series of the LG to the Spanish Republic. This is number 34 out of that series. But it illustrates, if you remember last week, I mentioned the Spanish president that allowed the bombings on that Spanish town of Guernica. Eventually, that Spanish president is going to be chased out of office. And this LG is done in remembrance of Spain recapturing their country from this corrupt president. And it is a very abstract interpretation, and the people are represented by large black blobs, which is why there's black blobs throughout. And it almost looks like the background has been marked out in some areas, but he's chosen to do that on purpose. That takes us to what's happening in architecture post-World War II. So post-World War II, the international style remained extremely popular, especially in places like the United States. It had become even more box-like than it already was, if you remember it from last week. But the reason why it was so popular was because of how practical the style was. Form definitely followed the function. And the main function of most of these international style buildings ends up evolving into businesses and office spaces, which is why the box-like shape was so useful. It was perfect for office spaces and businesses to function. So out of the international styles continuation, we see buildings pop up like Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill's Lever House, located in New York City. This is quintessential post-war international style. It's even more boxy than it was pre-World War II, and very, very practical. And of course, you've probably seen lots of these. This is what's known as a skyscraper. But there are some artists that are beginning to open the door for postmodern art and architecture, which we will see an example of that from Brazil in a moment. This particular postmodern example of architecture is very similar to the international style, but it has taken its own artistic license. So it's less about form following function, and it has a bit more of an aesthetic appeal going on with it. And our example of postmodern architecture is Oscar Niemeyer Planalto Palace from Brazil. So here you can still see the reminiscence of the glass steel framed box structure, but on the exterior, Niemeyer has added a cantilevered roof as well as some, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Dang it. I have been teaching too many art classes and now I can't remember words. That's not good. Flying buttresses, that's the word. I finally remembered. I'm like, it's a Gothic architectural piece. Flying buttresses, and of course you can see that there is a lovely little ramp that leads up to the second floor too, which is interesting. So it's like the international style, but a little bit more artistic. Meanwhile, with sculptures, we have things called assemblage popping up. Assemblage art pieces are a mixture of random objects put together. We've already looked at these before. It's also a take on the Dada ready-mades. So if you remember last week, Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades, the already made objects that he just put together and renamed. That is what an assemblage harkens back to. So it's artists reimagining the art that they saw as around the time that assemblage art was being created. Artists were a bit tired of abstract expressionism, so they were trying to reinvent and to think of a new way to express themselves besides just abstract expressionism. And from that, we see artists coming forth like Robert Rauschenberg. Robert Rauschenberg, I've mentioned a few times in this class already. He's from Texas. He's Texas' most famous artist. And this is Tracer, which is a combination of an oil painting, and it also has silkscreen prints on top of it. So the background area is painted with an oil paint. And then over top, I think you can see he has screen printed over top in certain areas with different images from magazines and newspapers, such as these planes from the Vietnam War or the Korean War, one of those. Which one's happening in the 60s? Vietnam War. And here is another Robert Rauschenberg. We've already looked at this one before, so I just pulled it up to remind you of what else he was doing. This is like the quintessential Robert Rauschenberg piece, Monogram, in which he took a canvas that had oil paint on it, as well as wooden pieces that said Dada, and he took it off the wall, laid it on the ground, and put a stuffed goat that he splattered paint on and a tire on top of it. That is an assemblage. So an assemblage is a combination. It's basically a mixed media piece. It's a fancy word for mixed media. Another artist that's working with assemblage is Edward Keenholz. This is Edward Keenholz' John Doe, which is a statement on middle-class Americans at this moment in time. So John Doe, for those of you that aren't familiar, that's the name that's given to someone who dies and nobody can identify, particularly a male. If you're a female, you're called Jane Doe. So he found all of these objects in a dumpster and he threw them all together. So he has a stroller with a little excerpt down here about his thoughts. And he found a mannequin in the dumpster, cut the heart out of it and put a cross inside and covered it in paint and blood-looking paint and put that man in a stroller. So referencing, once again, white middle-class America and his thoughts on that. So do you guys think that Edward Keenholz was a fan of white middle-class America? Yes or no? It's a 50-50 shot, and one it's pretty.
I'm letting others answer that one.
It's kind of an obvious answer, guys. Does this fellow that's made this to represent middle class America like middle class America?
I'm gonna go with no.
No, he does not. Thank you, Jesse. See, that wasn't hard. So obviously he is poking a bit of fun at the fact that they're all obsessed with raising families in Christianity and being the perfect family group and people. But in reality, they're just a joke, basically, is the way he's portraying it here. There's a bunch of other different ways that you can read into this as well, but we're not going to get into those tonight on the off chance that I might offend someone, and I don't want to do that right before Thanksgiving break. So we will move on to our next example of assemblage, which is Jasper Johns. Jasper Johns was an extremely popular artist, and I don't think I included why. No, I didn't. I should pull that up because there's a specific reason why he was popular. One second. So Jasper Johns was extremely popular because the very first art piece that he released was this one right here with the 3 flags. So he made 3 canvases in different sizes and painted the American flag on each one. People loved it. particularly Americans, which made Jasper Johns a very popularized artist from the get-go. Because his art seemed extremely patriotic as well as easily digestible for the masses. Pop artists following Jasper Johns are going to catch on to that fact and run with it. But I think you can probably see why Jasper Johns might be a little bit more popular than people like Edward Kienholz. Probably. But Jasper Johns also created this assemblage. Once again, an assemblage is just a mixed media art piece of 4 faces. So here he has wood paneling, which he has painted with oil, and he has sculpted 4 clay faces and put them into a wooden box. There's not much more to it. It's an easily digestible, readable image. And that is what Jasper Johns did. Nothing complex like this fellow. Nothing to offend or hurt anyone.
Is that symmetric? The bullseye?
Yeah, this is symmetrical, yes. Almost all of Jasper Johns' artworks are extremely symmetrical too, which I really like that. I appreciate symmetry. Meanwhile, last week, I believe we haven't talked about. So this is our first occurrence of new things called events and happenings. So events and happenings come forth as artists try to merge theater with the arts. Not that theater isn't the arts, but like not theatrical plays, but plays made just for like artistic purposes. Just like films were beginning to be used for artistic purposes as a medium. Artists were also beginning to use things like theater acts for those things. And the first group of artists that decided to use living, moving art was the Gutai group. The Gutai group was a group of Japanese artists that made very short events that would often shock their viewers. So their viewers in particular didn't know what was going to happen, but some events and happenings, which is what these things are called when an artist makes a living artwork, sometimes the viewers know what's happening, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the viewers are the participants in the event or happening, sometimes they are onlookers. Sometimes the events and happenings are partially planned, sometimes they're scripted. It's pretty vague as far as the rules with events and happenings go. The Gutai group in particular, though, they did things such as this one. This was an event in which the artist Saburo Murakami ran through paper. He did this basically to mock his own heritage. Does anyone understand the importance of paper to Japan? Anyone at all? Why would paper be so important for the Japanese people?
Does that have to do something with like they write on paper, like use their special brushes and ink?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons, yes. So Japan was very well known for producing calligraphy arts for a majority of the time. That's like what they're mostly known for, was for calligraphy and painting on paper. So it was very precious to them for that part. Of course, there's also the art of origami, but paper was also used for their doors and screens. If you're familiar with that, they have paper door screens that slide open and close, which is really cool. So paper is also used to create homes, basically. Paper is actually a bit of a sacred object for them, like I mentioned, just because it has such a long history with that particular country. And right here, Saburo Murakami is running through panels that are large formats of the doors that they use, of paper, just destroying it on the way. And of course, we're going to watch a video of it. We don't have the original video, but he did do a second performance later on that we can look at. Of course, it is a very short performance because it doesn't take too long to run through paper. Which I'm sure you probably know, it doesn't take very long to run through paper. That was it. So of course it's entitled Passing Through because he's passing through the paper. And if you notice, the other one was entitled Passage or Passing Through as well. It also has to do with passing through time and history and the time and the history of paper with Japan. And that is the example of the Gutai group, which is once again the very first group of artists to perform events and happenings. As you can see, it's not anything formal usually. And that could have gone many different directions. It's not like that was super well planned out. He could have hurt himself possibly. Speaking of hurting himself, we're going to go to our next example of an event or a happening by Jean Tinguely. Jean Tinguely creates Homage to New York, a self-constructing, self-destructing work of art for New York City in New York City outside of MoMA in 1960. This particular event slash happening did not go as planned. You can kind of see it from the image there. So what this machine was supposed to do is it was supposed to make or add on to itself, and then after it had added onto itself, it was supposed to start catching fire. Unfortunately, the machine caught fire just a few seconds into the event, so not when it was supposed to, and it caught fire way worse than it was supposed to. It was just supposed to be the end part that caught fire, but as you can see right here, it's the middle section that is caught fire instead. The fire department had to be called out. Is a big mess. This one is an event that did not go as planned, so we do have a short video of this one as well. Just an example of one that did not work out. Because sometimes events and happenings don't work out.
The machines make spectacular. It's a sculpture.
And that is Jean Tinguely.
Picture, make sounds. It's a componist. It's good. Yeah, componist. It's a poet. It's.
And actually, rewind it a little bit.
This machine is a situation.
So he was in the middle of talking and he didn't realize behind him the thing had caught fire. Most of the audience thought that that was supposed to happen then. Now they know better. And of course, we can't see the ending because eventually there's too much smoke and people had to evacuate. But yeah, there's an artist named John Cage that did a homage to this particular event later on. John Cage, if you're not familiar with him, he's a composer. He sets a piano on fire as a homage to Jean Tagle's homage, which is kind of cute. We're going to be looking at more contemporary events and happenings later on tonight as well. Today, we refer to as events and happenings as performance art. It has its own category now. So art that you're supposed to watch people perform or something perform in, rather than an event or a happening. But before we can get to performance art, we do have to go through a few things. We're going to look at pop art. Like I mentioned, it's people like Jasper Johns that really challenge artists to look at the possibility of popularizing art. Pop art is a result of things like that. Pop art is a mass production of art. And pop art actually first originates in London. Most people always think that pop art is from America, but that's because it was most successful in America. However, it is originally from London. There are some rules for pop art. Pop art should be popular and use popularized images. It should be easily mass produced. It should be able to be made at a low cost, aimed at the youth, be a little bit gimmicky or kitschy, as well as glamorous and witty. All of those things add up together to make an art that is extremely popular for the masses to purchase, making the artists themselves a lot of money. So our very first pop artist from London is Richard Hamilton. Most people, once again, usually think it's Andy Warhol. However, it is Richard Hamilton. He's the one that starts the pop art movement. And it is this particular image here, just what is it that makes today's homes so different, so appealing, that really sparks the beginning of this movement. So you can see this is actually it just says pop up there. Originally, the actual image does not say pop. This was printed on it by Phaidon Publishing Company. That's where I got this image from. But there is a particular reason in this image as far as a product placement as to why pop art is called pop art. Can anyone find the reason? Or the product?
Is it because of the popsicle?
That's not a popsicle, dude. That look like a popsicle?
That's a lollipop.
That's a lollipop.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a Tootsie Roll Pop, actually, to be very specific. That's a Tootsie Pop. So it is that Tootsie Pop that gets pop art its actual name eventually. That is where that came from, was that Tootsie Pop there. It's also a bit of a play on words too, as well as a play on imagery there, if you really want to read into it. So this particular image, once again, pop art is supposed to be popular. This image does use popularized subject matter, such as a really well-known movie, The Jazz Singer, as well as a popular comic book and popular products, such as the Ford automobile, canned ham, that had just been made in the 1950s for the first time. So that was very popular. Television, extremely popular. Record player and a vacuum cleaner. All of those things are popular hot commodities in the 50s. Pop art should also be easily mass produced. This is just a collage of different magazine images, so it's not like it took them a lot of time or money to make this by buying paints or anything like that. Low cost, once again, it was very cheap. It is aimed at the youth by using, once again, popular images. It shows the ideal man from the 50s as well as the ideal female from the 50s. And it should be gimmicky, glamorous, and witty, which if you notice, this is a bit gimmicky and witty going on here and here. And it is also a bit glamorous as far as a lifestyle. Now, can anyone make out what the ceiling's actually made of? I didn't talk about that part. The ceiling is an actual, like, really famous photograph.
Looks like quark.
Looks like a planet.
It's the moon. You're on the right track. Yeah, it's one of the first photographs of the moon from a close-up angle. So yeah, it was actually published in Times Magazine is where he got that moon. So yeah, planet was very close. Another pop artist that is not Andy Warhol is James Rosenquist. And this is F111 from 1965. This is canvas and aluminum with oil paints on top of it, and it is in 4 parts. This particular painting is extraordinarily large. This is only part of it. It keeps going on either side, so I'm sure you can imagine just how large this canvas actually is. It's gigantic. And of course, the image itself is decked out with popular subject matter such as airplanes, car tires, as well as popular hair care tools at the time. But it is also a bit of a depressing image as well. He is commenting on well, the way of the world at that moment. So he's kind of protesting the war, which we can't really, let me get a better image, because there's a part in this painting that is not actually in this particular section of the painting, in which he portrays the atomic bomb as well. So let's see if I can get the full image instead of just the piece. Ah, there's a better one. So much back and forth today. Sorry about that. But here in this corner, right next to the girl with the hair, you can see he has portrayed the atomic bomb with the mushroom, and instead of showing the mushroom, he's put an umbrella over it like he's covering it up. Same with the airplane here. You can tell that it's supposed to be an army plane, but over here he's kind of made it look like it's a commercial plane by covering it up with this girl, which is a more positive image. So he's trying to use positive imagery to cover up the negative things, which was what he felt like the United States was trying to do in general, was to cover up the nasty bits with fun things. So his pop art's a little bit deeper than Richard Hamilton's was that we just looked at. Has a bit of a statement to it. And I'm surprised I talked about that one that long. I don't usually talk about James Rosenquist very much. Must be in a mood. And then, of course, the quintessential pop artist is Andy Warhol. We've already discussed the Maryland diptych quite at length before, but a diptych is a painting or image that is in 2 parts. So these 2 things are actually separate. They're just displayed connected together. Of course, you have your colored half and your black and white half. Andy Warhol did not clean his silk screens after usage, which is why the images vary quite a bit. He liked for his images to be individual, which is a little bit outside of the lines of pop art. Pop art is supposed to be mass produced, but he liked for every single one of his images to be just a tad bit different, just because people are all different. He would choose popular celebrities and idols and icons to portray in his images, which does fall in line with the pop art idea. Yes. And here is Andy Warhol's Race Riot. This is a different kind of Warhol than what people are probably used to seeing. But this is a very, I feel like, important Warhol image. So here you see the same photograph being portrayed in 4 different panels. Those 4 different panels are supposed to mimic the United States flag, the red, white, and blue. And of course, this is Andy Warhol making a statement on racial tensions that were occurring in the 1960s in the United States. It really portrays his frustration, though, with America. So what do you guys see in this image? You can just look at all of them. They're the same. What is happening in this picture?
They're fighting.
What's
Isn't it like the black and white movement?
not really black and white, but
No, like the segregation type of movement. Yeah.
the civil rights movement from 1964. Yes. Is anyone familiar of what happened with that movement?
Martin Luther King Jr. Something.
You guys need to take a history class. My gosh, this is just sad. This is important history, guys. What happened? So in the 1960s, there is a large movement, particularly in the South, for African Americans to gain equal rights and not have segregation anymore, as well as many, many other things that they were fighting for and still are fighting for today. And this is a newspaper photograph that was taken. So oftentimes at these protests, which by the way, they were peaceful protests, police officers would hose down the protesters and pepper spray them and release the dogs on them, which is exactly what's being shown here. So here we see 2 police officers and 1 German Shepherd and 1 African-American man who's being bitten by the German Shepherd. But what do you see in the background?
Peaceful protesters.
What are they doing? You see people. What are the people in the background doing?
Observing.
They are observing. Are they helping this man?
No.
They are standing there observing. Very good. So you see people in the background that are standing there doing nothing. That was Andy Warhol's statement. He was sick and tired of people standing around and doing nothing. So that is exactly why he chose this particular photograph. In the foreground, you see that this man is being bitten by a German Shepherd, and in the background, you see people standing there. He felt like people had become so numb with seeing these images of the civil rights movement being published in newspapers that they just weren't motivated to do anything anymore. They were just going to be bystanders, which is something that we saw echoed again in this summer's Black Lives Matter movement. It kind of trickled off there at the end because people just started observing rather than partaking. And our last example of pop art is Roy Lichtenstein. Roy Lichtenstein is a wonderful, wonderful example of a pop artist. He would use popular comic book references in his artworks. If you're familiar with old school comic books, they use little dots in colors to illustrate their images. And those little dots are called Ben-Day dots. And Roy Lichtenstein also used Ben-Day dots. So if we blew up this image really, really big, you would know that this image is made up of a bunch of polka dots, very uniformly put on there by hand. They're so uniform that it looks like a machine did it, because with comic books, of course, a machine is printing them. But in fact, he painted them by hand. Of course, he made a lot of play on words. This is actually a series of this one girl that he pulled from a comic book of her relationship status with the male character from that particular comic. He's also done a series with famous buildings like the Cologne Cathedral in Ben-Day dots. But here you see, of course, in the center of the composition in a swirling pattern, the girl crying and saying, "I don't care, I'd rather sink than call Brad for help." Brad is that male counterpart in the series. Sometimes in the images she loves him, sometimes she can't stand him. So yeah. And of course, the antithesis of pop art is minimalism. Minimalism is what it says. It is minimal. It excludes everything that was previously important to art. It's literally just shapes and color. So it's like we're going back to that suprematism constructivism period that we talked about last week, but like on steroids. And the main minimalist artist is Donald Judd. Donald Judd creates large boxes and copies of boxes made of metal and plexiglass sometimes. Sometimes they're all metal, sometimes there's also plexiglass. Donald Judd does not title his artworks. They are all untitled. Once again, because he's a minimalist, he does not even bother to title his artworks. In fact, Donald Judd doesn't even touch his artworks. Donald Judd has a factory make them. Well, he's dead now. But Donald Judd had all of his art pieces mass produced in a factory. He didn't even touch them. That's how minimal he was involved in the process. So minimal is just as basic and pared down as you can get with art. Donald Judd actually has an entire foundation. Well, he bought a large piece of land outside of Marfa called Chinati. So if you're ever near Marfa, you might want to check it out. It has a large amount of contemporary art as well as minimalist art. He bought that space and he and all of his friends exhibited there. But it's actually really pretty. Like, I hate minimalism because it's boring. But the way he's displayed them at Chinati, he has highly polished pieces of bronze juxtapositioned with the landscape. So the bronze actually reflects the landscape around it, which really captures the beauty of minimalism and what minimalism can be, which is not minimal at all. Another minimalist artist is Ellsworth Kelly. Ellsworth Kelly does large canvases of solid color, which we can see here. This is actually 5 different canvas panels that have been attached together, and every single panel is painted in one solid color. So basic, pared down, not too much going on there. Very minimal. And then, of course, our last minimal artist is Frank Stella. Frank Stella would get large canvases, paint the backgrounds white, and then paint geometric shapes on top of them. So not as minimal as, let's say, Ellsworth Kelly or Donald Judd. There's a little bit more attention to detail put forward here, but not too much. And that brings us to conceptual art. Conceptual art is something that a lot of people struggle to grasp, but I feel like it's genius. Conceptual art owes a lot of credit to Marcel Duchamp and René Magritte. René Magritte was the one that did the painting that This Is Not a Pipe, and Marcel Duchamp is the Dada artist from last week. But conceptual art is art that's based around making money selling your ideas or selling your concepts. So let's say you were a conceptual artist and you make a list of directions and then you sell those directions. Because this is actually something that a conceptual artist did, and I'm actually gonna pull this up so I can see you guys for a second. So this is a real story. There is a conceptual artist that exists that sold directions to galleries and museums and art collectors. Those directions were: step 1, section off a 5-foot by 7-foot piece of wall and put painter's tape around it. Step 2, get a number 2 pencil. Step 3, for an hour every day for the next year, create small repetitive circles inside of that 5-foot by 7-foot rectangle on your wall. Repeat until 365 days are finished. When you are done, you will have your art piece. He sold his ideas and he made a lot of money off of it. He also sold directions once on how to make a chair. Of course, he didn't tell you it was a chair. He just sold the directions. And then when you were done with your directions, you realized you made a chair. So conceptual art, hard to grasp for a lot of people, but it's literally just an idea. The quintessential conceptual artist is Joseph Kosuth. Joseph Kosuth sells this. So he instructs the either museum, gallery, or collector, buy a chair, take a picture of a chair, and put up a definition of the chair. And here is your art piece. Title it 1 in 3 chairs. So then the museum will go out, they will find a chair, they will take a picture of that chair, and they will put up the definition of the chair. And then in the end, they have the art piece. So Joseph Kosuth, similarly to Donald Judd, doesn't actually make any of his stuff. He just sells his ideas, which causes a lot of issues for lawyers as to who owns what when one person wants to sell the art piece. Like, are you supposed to sell the idea? Are you supposed to sell the art piece? What are you supposed to do? There's a lot of lawyers that end up getting involved when it comes to conceptual art. But it is a bit fun. And that takes us to site-specific artworks. We have already gone over those once. Those are art pieces that are made for specific sites and locations. They do not work in other areas because they are made for that very specific location. These particular kinds of artists want art to be an experience rather than a commodity, which is why they do not make them available for display in museums or galleries, because they don't want people to be purchasing it. They want people to experience it. And such artists are Jean-Claude and Christo. We've already talked about them before. They were the ones that wrapped the Florida Keys in pink fabric. They also created Running Fence, which is a several-mile-long fence that once, for a very, very brief moment in time, went through several different cattle ranchers' lands in California along the mountains. It's very site specific. It was made for that specific area, and when it was done, they put it in storage, and it will not be on display again. Another example of a site specific work is Walter de Maria's The Lightning Field, which is still located and up in Quemado, New Mexico. So you can go visit it. Of course, you have to make pre-arrangements to go visit it. Walter de Maria owns that land, and they have a foundation set up. So you do have to pay to go see it, but the foundation donates money to like a program. I can't remember which program. It's been a long time. But then you get to go in a group to this lightning field. This is a field filled with lightning rods, and in an area of New Mexico that gets frequent lightning storms, which is why it's so site specific, because it was made for this specific area of the United States that gets frequent lightning storms. These lightning rods obviously attract and conduct that electricity. And of course, if you go to the lightning field, you are behind a wall and inside of a building. You're not actually standing out in the field. So, yeah, but very site specific. It would not work, let's say, if you threw it up in like Chicago. It's not going to work there like it did in New Mexico, because it's just not the same environment. It is very site specific. Another example of a site specific work that we've already talked about, this is Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, made specifically for the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Another one that you can go visit. This one is free to visit though. So if you're ever in Utah, you can go there and check it out. But it was made for this specific lake. Certain times of the year, the lake water covers it, and the krill that inhabit the lake go and nest and breed inside of the spiral, which creates a perfect habitat to protect them from their natural predators. This makes the spiral itself pink in color, and then eventually the krill will exit and it will turn blue again. It was made specifically to interact with the krill in that lake. And of course, installations, another thing that we've already talked about in this class. Installations are art pieces that take up the entire space. It's when an artist transforms an entire room. And the example of installation that we have from post-war contemporary art is Yayoi Kusama. And here is her infinity mirror room. So what Yayoi Kusama does is she sets up an entire room in which the walls are made of mirrors. Does anyone know what happens when you put a mirror across from another mirror? What happens?
It looks like
All favorite
it goes on
question?
infinity.
Yeah, it makes it look like it continues on forever and ever and ever. So fun fact for anyone that's never been to Monaghan's, and this is how I learned this when I was a child. They have an old museum called the Million Barrel Museum in Monaghan's, and in it they have a train car. And in that train car, to create the effect of more train cars on the train, what they did is they put a mirror across from another mirror to make it look like there's a whole bunch of train cars, even though there's only just one. So that's how I figured out when I was very little what happens when you put two mirrors across from each other. But that's exactly what Yayoi Kusama does. She makes a mirror room. It's a very, very small room, but it looks really large just because of having so many mirrors. It looks like it goes on forever. I mean, you can see in the background just how much space she has made up here in this small location. This is an extremely small room, by the way. I've been in one of these. It's about 3 feet by 3 feet. They're very small, but it looks huge. That's thanks to the mirrors. And of course, she has filled it with fabric polka dot objects that resemble phallics. That was what she did when she started off. Today, she does pumpkins, which is a lot more family friendly. So she makes fabric pumpkins with a glow in the dark fabric on the outside and puts them inside of these infinity mirror rooms. Once again, these are extremely small rooms, but they look really large. That is because she has used the mirrors to transform that space and make it look like it is larger than it actually is. So not only has she created an installation, but she's also created like another dimensional area or a feeling of that. And speaking of Yayoi Kusama, we are now going to enter into the realm of feminism. The second wave of feminism occurs in the 1960s. The first wave of feminism is where women are trying to get the right to vote. The second wave of feminism that's happening in the 60s is when women are trying to get equal rights in things like careers, so equal pay and same pay and things like that. As well as better job opportunities. And there are a lot of artists that are picking up on these trends and helping to aid in that fight by producing artworks that support those feminist ideals. One such female artist that works in that format is Judy Chicago. This is Judy Chicago's Dinner Party, which is located in Boston. We're not going to watch the video because it really just shows this image in slow motion. But this particular dinner party, for those of you that aren't familiar, when you have a dinner party, you invite a bunch of guests. Judy Chicago's Dinner Party invites all of the women throughout American history that she thinks should be included in textbooks and history textbooks in general, as well as art textbooks and other things. And it goes in chronological order, starting with the oldest woman, Sacagawea, going throughout time, and then you make your way over here to the other side, which ends with the female artist Georgia O'Keeffe, which we also talked about just last week. So fairly contemporary for Judy Chicago's time. Each dinner plate is different, and each table setting is unique to that particular person. So for Sacagawea, you see an animal hide, which would match with her Native American heritage. You'll also notice that her plate is very flat, and if you go on, the plates end up becoming sculptures themselves. Georgia O'Keeffe's is a three-dimensional object. Some people are not a fan of the dinner party because they feel like some of the plates resemble vaginas, which is just kind of funny because Georgia O'Keeffe got in trouble for the same thing when she was an artist. A lot of the people thought that her flower paintings were like vaginas, the way she painted them, but she actually didn't intend for that. Judy Chicago did it on purpose, just to make fun of them. But each place setting is individualized for that specific person. The table setting cloths themselves, these little cloth areas, they were made by female quilters. Normally, quilting is considered a craft, not an art, and it's also considered to be women's work. Judy Chicago here was trying to help elevate quilt making to a higher art form and show people that quilt making is an art and not just women's work or craft. You can also see that there are things written on the tiles below. On every single one of these tiles are all of the other women that are excluded throughout history. Judy Chicago made this entire art piece as a statement on the fact that United States history likes to primarily focus on white men. And she was done with it. She was frustrated with it, and she wanted people to realize just how many women in history had been excluded because the United States wanted to focus on white males instead. And here is a close-up of Georgia O'Keeffe's place setting, which does use a cloth setting place, which is reminiscent to the color patterns in one of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, and this G is also hearkening to one of her floral paintings as well. And you can also say one of the names down here. You can see it's Frida Kahlo. It's Frida down there. Another feminist artist is Nancy Spiro. Nancy Spiro was very interested in showing that women were more than just mothers. She was also very interested in protesting the Vietnam War. And here she was interested in showing what a woman was in the 80s. So she felt that most art still portrayed women as the Venus. So back in the background here, we see a Greek statue of Venus being shown. And in the foreground, you see a woman that has burst and broken out of the Venus statue and is running forward. This woman symbolizes the new woman. She is running, she is powerful, she is not just some beautiful statue. If you remember back to Greek and Roman statues, Venus was supposed to symbolize beauty and idealism at that time. And Nancy Spiro wants to educate the world on the fact that women are not just those beautiful idealized figures anymore, but they are also strong. And our last feminist artist is Ana Mendieta. Ana Mendieta was also part of that second wave of feminism. She, however, was interested in the idea of the mother goddess. Does anyone have any ideas of what the mother goddess is, or what she was the goddess of?
Tree?
No, not trees. Boy, just because there's a tree there. No, the mother goddess.
Nature?
Yes, nature. Thank you. I don't know who said that. The mother goddess is the goddess of nature, the goddess of all earth, basically. So part of this second wave of feminism came thank you, came a small group of women that believed that females were superior to men because they were life givers, like the mother goddess was the life giver to all of the planet and the earth. So they decided to basically rewrite, I don't know, Christian history, which is what most of the United States is based on, instead of having a man make things, they wanted to make things seem like it all came from a woman. And women are still making things, hence their wombs and childbirthing. Ana Mendieta was part of that movement, and she did performance art where she would perform things like this. And she also did a lot of photography in which she herself was trying to represent that mother goddess by becoming one with the earth. So here you see her, this is her. She is nude and covered in mud and grass and trying to blend in with the tree. And here is another Ana Mendieta. You can see her silhouette in which she has once again become one with the earth. Here she, basically, this is snow. She dug a hole in the shape of her body into the snow and she put in red pigment. And here's another Ana Mendieta photograph. These are all from her Tree of Life series, by the way. They're all from the same art series. Once again, she's trying to blend in and become one with the earth. Eventually, Ana Mendieta was only in her 20s when she was pushed out of a window or jumped out of the window. Depends on who you ask. She was married to a male artist, and about half of the artistic community believes that he pushed her because she was more famous than him, and then the other half of the artist community feel like she jumped out the window, but no one really knows why because she was really famous then. So it depends on who you ask, but now in the museum in which this Tree of Life series is exhibited, there is a tribute in the shape of her body with candles that you can visit. And that takes us to performance art. Like I mentioned, Ana Mendieta occasionally would perform her art pieces in front of the public. Sometimes they were just photographs, but performance art is what comes about after events and happenings. Like I mentioned earlier, events and happenings will eventually get their own title in the art world, and that title is performance art. That is art in which you would perform either with an audience or in front of an audience. Once again, relating back to those Dada performances that we talked about last week, although actually we didn't talk about it. So the Dada artists, besides making really kooky, crazy artwork like irons with thumbtacks on them, but they would also wear tinfoil hats, go stand out on the street corner and speak in gibberish, in a made-up language, to try and creep people out. So that was their form of performance art. And eventually, of course, there is the Good Thai group that performed events and happenings. And eventually we have today's performance art. Today's performance art can be normal, and it can also be just as kooky as the originals. A few years ago, I went to a performance art piece in Chicago. They didn't tell us what the art piece was going to be about at all. They just said, show up at this building at this time. The show's going to start then. There's going to be food at the end. So my friend and I show up because we usually went to these things anyways. We went to gallery openings and things like that all the time. But we showed up and we were told to take off our coat and hang it on the coat rack because it was the middle of winter in Chicago, so we all had coats. And to sit on the floor in the hallway Indian style. There were about 30 people. We all had no idea what it was doing. We were all in this very cramped hallway. It was probably only about 4 feet wide with 30 people inside of it, which is not very comfortable at all. Eventually, we see a woman come around to the corner. She's dressed in a turtleneck, slacks, and she's carrying a block of wood. She gets in front of all 30 of us and then starts taking the block of wood and banging herself on the head with it. And she does that for about 2 minutes. Then she puts down the block of wood and she starts taking off all of her clothes, all of them. She takes off everything. She folds them all up very neatly and places them on top of the block of wood, picks up the block of wood, stands up and tells all of us to come follow her. and thinking back now, I'm like, maybe this is how people get kidnapped. I don't know. But all 30 of us stand up and follow her. And then we go through different rooms in which she performs other odd events like breastfeeding in front of us. Once again, she's still naked throughout this. And eventually we get to the end, and once again, she's still naked. And she decides to serve us wine and cheese. And then after about 30 minutes of that, the show was over. And that was the performance art. It's very interesting. And most performance art is very interesting. Once again, just like events and happenings, sometimes the audience knows what's going to happen. Sometimes they have no clue, which is what was my experience in that particular moment. Sometimes they're scripted. That particular performance piece that I went to was scripted. Sometimes they aren't scripted. It just depends on what you're going to. But the performance art that we're going to look at right now is by Joseph Beuys. Joseph Beuys is a German artist, and this is his I Like America, America Likes Me from the 70s. So for this particular performance piece, Joseph Beuys got on a plane and came to America for the very first time. He'd never been to America before. He blindfolded himself once he landed, and he was ushered into a vehicle and still blindfolded was driven to the museum, walked into this gallery space, and that is where he was finally unblindfolded. So he didn't actually see anything. When he entered into this space, he was greeted by his roommate for the next few days, which was a coyote, a wild coyote. He was given a daily newspaper every day. He also had a felt blanket and a wooden cane. That was all he had for a week. He and the coyote eventually became good friends, mostly because the coyote needed food and Joseph Beuys would feed him. But after the week-long progress, I don't know what you would call that process. By the way, the only way people could see this is there was a small window in the door in which you could peek into. So that was how people saw the show. That was the performance. You could peek into the window and see how they were living together for the week. But after the show ended, after those 5 days, Joseph Beuys once again put on his blindfold, got into the car, got on the plane, and flew back to Germany. So he didn't actually see America at all. The only America he experienced was the coyote and the newspaper that he got every day. The coyote represents the wildness that the West, or the untamed West, that America boasts or used to boast to the rest of the world. And the New York Times was the newspaper that he got every day. The New York Times was representative of conglomerate corporate America. So he got to see America, just not literally. So that was his performance piece. It's a very interesting one. Another Joseph Beuys performance piece. This is his oak tree performance piece, in which he went around the city in Berlin and painted 100 oak trees. That was more a statement on go green and help continue nature and air purification. And another Joseph Beuys performance piece. This is explaining modern art to a dead rabbit. For this art performance, he covered his face in gold leaf, tied a lead weight to his foot. Don't ask why, I don't know why. And got a dead rabbit corpse, and literally for several hours sat in the middle of a museum and explained modern art to a dead rabbit. That was the performance. See, performance art, it's very interesting and kooky. Joseph Beuys today does, well, actually he's dead now, but more contemporary pieces are not performance art. Nowadays, he's most well known for his sculptural pieces, such as this one. And that is actually it for tonight. Do not leave. I repeat, do not leave. I am saying that very loudly because last week, a bunch of you left, even though I told you not to leave. Do not leave. There are some very, very important things that we need to go over, such as your reward for coming tonight. But first I gotta retake attendance because a whole bunch of people came in late. Y'all late people, you just make my life miserable. Can you come on time, please? At least once? Because it's the same people every week. Make it so sad. Anna has an excuse. She has a new baby. Babies make things hard. The rest of you guys, can you try coming on time? So just a reminder that you have your gallery report that you need to be doing. It is due on the 29th. That is a big, big grade. It's your last grade before the final exam. For anyone that is failing, that is going to be your main saving grace. Now, the next big thing. Oh, I actually need to share my screen for this one. Okay. Now that I've got all the attendance updated, I need that. So, if we go to modules, and I'm saying this because I've gotten several emails from you guys about it. For those of you that want to do virtual online galleries, it's been on here for about 2 weeks. But if you go to modules on Canvas and go down to your gallery review module, your instructions on how to do the gallery review and where you submit it are right here. And your list of options for virtual exhibitions are right below that. Once again, that is under modules in Canvas. That is where you will find it. Gallery review. It's towards the bottom because it's like the second to last thing we're doing in this class, right before the final. The other big thing is that for anyone that is missing something in this class, if you are missing an assignment in this class, meaning if at any point in time you did not turn in something, you have until Friday to get that to me. I reopened all of your old assignments for those of you that are missing things for you to get those turned in. It is open once again until this Friday. So not only do you people have to do your gallery review, you also need to turn in your missing work. If you want to pass my class, you need to do those two things, okay? I have never before opened up the missing assignments, never. But you guys need it. You need it. I cannot stress that enough. Not all of you. Some of you have done everything and you're wonderful and I love you and I appreciate you and thank you. But some of you on here are missing things and will probably fail my class if you don't get those turned in. So get those turned in. You will not get full credit because they are extraordinarily late, but you will get enough credit to pass my class. So get those done by Friday, not after Friday. Don't ask me on Monday if you can do it because I'm going to tell you no because you have until Friday. So get those done along with your gallery report. Now, very serious topic, done. Are there any questions about anything at all? Any questions at all about your gallery report, about missing assignments, about grades, about your final, anything? So last thing to note, I told you guys that came early and on time. I am going to be in Monahans this week, and if you've ever been there, you might know that the internet there sucks. So if you guys do have a problem, as of noon tomorrow, it's going to be very difficult for me to be able to help. Thank you, Brock. I appreciate that. So if you have a problem after noon tomorrow, because as of noon, 12 o'clock tomorrow, I will be out of Midland and in a place with very poor internet. So it would be very difficult for me to help you there. I will try, but it's going to be hard. So now would be the good time to ask any questions if you have them. If not, you can email me and I will try and answer them, but I'm not going to make any promises because it's really bad connection there. But once again, For those of you that are missing things, get those done, please. I'm begging you. Don't make me fail you. I hate failing people. Also get your gallery review done. But most importantly, have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Enjoy a break. I'm sure you all need it. I know I need it. And spend some time with your family and eat a bunch of food. You guys are free to go. I will see you all next Tuesday. We will be going over chapter 25 and we will be going over your final exam. So you're going to want to come for that one. Going over the final exam before the final exam. That's always a good one. So I will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a wonderful holiday, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Happy
That
Thanksgiving.
word was
Have a good one.
Jen. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Have a nice day and happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Have a good one.
Bye, guys.